Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Resuming Debate podcast. I have served as the shadow minister or critic for our caucus on international development issues for about the last 2 years. And I've really appreciated the opportunity to dig into the important issues around international development. The government of Canada gives away about $4 billion a year to try to support humanitarian relief, education, other forms of development in other countries. And there's a lot of issues around that. There's a lot of questions people have about how we do international development, how effective it is, and maybe ways that we can strengthen or change it. And there's, of course, also some people that are very skeptical about the fact that we're in this area at all. So I wanted to do an episode on international development, and in particular, the trigger for this episode is horrific flooding in Pakistan. These floods have killed over 1,500 people so far, and the government of Canada, as well as some Canadian organizations, have been engaged with this and making announcements and active in the response. So I'm joined by two good friends of mine and friends of each other who are great leaders in the international development space, and particularly that are very active in Pakistan. So first, I'll introduce Dr. Aslam Daud. He is the chairman of Humanity First, a nonprofit, a volunteer-based organization providing relief, assistance, and humanitarian aid across Canada and around the world. He helped found the Canadian chapter of Humanitarian First. And Mr. Rahul Singh is a Canadian paramedic and founder of GlobalMedic, a humanitarian relief organization providing disaster relief in areas affected by natural disasters and emergencies. So two great people to talk about development in general and the emergency response to the situation in Pakistan in particular. Aslam, Rahul, great to have you on today.
Thank you very much, Garnet, for inviting us. It's our honor to be here.
Thanks, Garnet. We really appreciate it.
So let's just start in a bit on what your lives are like right now. I mean, this must be a very intense time. We've got a very large Pakistani diaspora in Toronto, which is, I know, where both of you are based, and I'm sure a lot of people wanting to donate and help, and you're working hard to provide emergency relief. Just give us a bit of a snapshot of what you're up to and what your organizations are doing on the ground in Pakistan.
Okay, so you have seen in the media that more than 30% of the country is affected by the flood. 33 million people are affected there, and Humanity First volunteers were on the ground right after the flood to help people out. The situation is terrible, and it's not getting any better. The aid that is reaching out to people is not enough. There are many areas, many large populations where nothing has reached as yet. And our volunteers, I can tell you that right now, I've got about 900 volunteers and plus 30 doctors who are providing emergency food and other emergency supply aids. Plus, we are running 30 medical clinics over there. But it's just like a drop in the ocean right now. There's a lot more to be done. Later, I'll tell you what the situation and what we are seeing on the ground. Initially, there was a disaster damage, and the houses were lost, people were displaced. But now we are seeing illnesses over there. Waterborne diseases are being seen. Injuries are being seen, and there's an increasing demand for medical help also in the area that we are serving. So I'll let Rahul speak, and then we can go in more details.
At GlobalMedic, we've run about 250 ops. We've worked in 81 countries. We've, served millions of people in their worst time, in their time of need, and we provide them with life-saving humanitarian assistance. So we're fairly seasoned and very experienced and very good at what we do. This is the 10th time that we've worked in Pakistan, and in 2010, when we were there for the floods, I remember leading that team and saying, wow, this is the biggest ever, because 20 million people were affected. And here we are, 35 days into the flood, and 33 million people are affected, and the flood is not fully receding, and it'll increase in other areas and more people will be affected. And the race against time when it comes to flooding is always to avert the secondary catastrophe, which is what occurs when people don't have access to clean drinking water and they get acute watery diarrheals from waterborne diseases. We've lost this race. The millions and millions of people, the kids that needed access to clean water didn't get it. And now you're seeing massive widespread outbreaks of disease that are going to hurt more people than the floods did. And that's horrific. What we're doing is we're responding by giving people family emergency kits. So a point of use water purification unit, super simple, 2-bucket system, gravity fed, no electricity, no moving parts. Mom's able to put it together, take even that dirty flood water, pour it through, and then clean drinking water is available at the bottom so her kids don't continue to get sick. We're also providing some mechanical units. We're doing some food programs as well. We're supporting medical, providing essential medicines like oral rehydration sachets and other things to treat those acute watery diarrheals. Everything that we're doing is literally a drop in the ocean compared to the needs, right? Like this is so big and so mammoth, and it's already out of the news, and our government did very little for this, and it's disappointing.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back and probe the government response, but it's interesting the issue that you raised at the secondary effects of the disaster. So natural disasters can happen anywhere in the world, but obviously we see significantly greater impacts when those natural disasters happen in relatively less developed or lower income areas. Could you maybe just share a little bit about why those challenges are greater in let's say a flood in Pakistan versus if there was a major flood in Canada? Is it something just of the geography that they're more exposed to these disasters, or is it because of a lack of resilient infrastructure and pre-existing resources? And how does that play out?
Well, I'll start, and then Aslam, maybe you can chime in on anything that I miss. Geography's tough, right? You've got mountainous areas, you've got deserts, you've got high density in populations. You're widespread. You got some bad infrastructure on roads. Any of your good infrastructure there is, guess what? It's underwater, or it's wiped away, or it's damaged. And it's just a sheer mass of humanity, of people that don't have the elasticity to bounce back, right? Because they've lost everything, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a poor villager who lives at the side of the water, you're not there because you wanted waterside property. You're there because this is the place that floods, and it's the only place that you can be. And you might have 1 month's worth of wheat supply to get you and your family by with making local bread, and that's gone, along with your house, along with your animals. Maybe some of your kids are gone too. Like this affects the most poor in the most large way, and it's so widespread, and it's so incredibly numerous of people that are affected. Yeah, it's that bad. Listen, if a third of our country was underwater, if 30 million folks, right, were affected here in Canada, our response wouldn't be any better. Like, I mean, let's look at what happened in Vancouver just last year and the response to comparison to the extent of that flooding. So let's not think that we're in that much of a better position in terms of response. But man, it's pretty tough in Pakistan, and those are some of the reasons.
Yeah. So density is a big part of it in Pakistan. You're saying that because there's so many people that are concentrated in these areas.
Yeah, look, globally, if you think of the big problems that are in the world, like this inequitable distribution of wealth, right? Yeah. So you get people on the move because they're either fleeing guys with guns or looking for prosperity, right? People tend to move towards the cities in search of jobs. They tend to live towards the coast, so they get affected by climate change, a greater impact of storms. In places like Pakistan, people get pushed out to these, like they call them kacha lands, right? Like they get pushed out to these really bad lands that flood. In 2010, these were really bad floods. They were the century floods. Well, it's 12 years later, and we're back to that. Yeah. But there's just happens to be more people along them now, right? So there's a number of factors, but sheer volume really hurts this one.
Yeah. So it's not that we don't know that these are areas potentially at risk, but it's that people have settled there at larger numbers because of lack of options.
It's right. The lack of options. Yeah.
Go ahead, Aslam. Love to hear your perspective.
And I'll just add that the other challenge is that Pakistan does not have the infrastructure. Despite the 2010 floods, the country has not developed flood mitigation resources. If the water comes, first of all, there's no prevention to stop that water coming from there. But if it comes, there is no clean pathway to get rid of that water. The water is not receding. That's one thing. Then the people who live there near the water banks and in those areas, they have houses made of mud and leaf and wood, which cannot sustain any flooding. It will just wipe away because of that flood. That's another reason. And thirdly, when their livelihood is dependent on the agriculture. Pakistan is mostly an agricultural country. And this year, they had a bumper crop. That bumper crop was affected. They lost everything. And animals were killed in that. That means it's just not that their houses were wiped out and they were displaced, but they have completely lost their livelihood and they don't know what to do now. So that creates a big impact. Then the government of Pakistan does not have a system where they can reach out to everyone and help out. There is a big reliance on NGOs and international organizations to really come and help. So whatever is being done is not at all enough at this time.
You know, Garland, can I just add,
please.
what he's clearly saying there is the reliance on NGOs. Notice he didn't say one NGO. He didn't say a small group of people. There's a reliance in different parts of the country across such a big country of 250 million people on many agencies. This is not one group who can handle this alone. And that's super important for your people to understand.
Yeah, and I want to go in to talk about sort of the organizations themselves, the challenges you face in accessing government support and so on. But I think just in terms of this comment about infrastructure, about the fact that there were floods in the past and now there are floods again, what does it take coming out of a situation like this to say we need to have the infrastructure put in place to prevent a disaster like this again? Is that even realistic? Are we kind of stuck in this cycle where there's going to be floods like this periodically, or can we support the people of Pakistan in having the resources to actually have the infrastructure, the support, people located in the right areas, such that this isn't going to be the sort of issue that it is again?
So definitely that is required if you want to protect people from the next flooding. There needs to be some infrastructure developed, and Pakistan cannot do that alone on its own. It does not have resources, it does not have the funds, and it will definitely depend on international aid. If internationally, agencies who have the expertise on that, if they go there and look into how this can be done. I mean, we have a very good example from Bangladesh, where a cyclone is a very normal thing. A cyclone comes every year, but you will hear that the damage and destruction and loss of life is much less than what it used to be in the past. So we can do the same thing in Pakistan, where that infrastructure can be built to really protect people from the flood disaster. Now, why it's not high priority? Because it doesn't happen quite often in Pakistan compared to Bangladesh or some other countries like Philippines and other, where it is really an yearly event. In Pakistan, it happened this time after about 10 years. So that is something which really puts this effort into back burner. But definitely there needs to be a system. There needs to be a training of the organizations and support that needs to be provided so that people know what to do, how the international help can be coordinated to reach out different areas. Right now, there is no coordination. All the international agencies, government and the local agencies are helping on their own wherever they can find, because the need is so wide that it's very difficult to really manage and coordinate the need across the country.
I would just add to that, you do get flooding often in Pakistan, but it's mostly localized, right? It's not widespread like this. And when it happened in 2010, it's so catastrophic that we thought this will never occur again. And this is the century flood, but history's proving us wrong, because 12 years later, we're 56% worse than what it was. So they do need better flood infrastructure and better support. But just us talking about that takes away from the fact that there are 4-year-old kids there right now that don't have clean water. And they're probably going to die because of something as stupid as not having clean water and getting stuck living in a flood zone and not having a reasonable international response coming in, and they didn't deserve that, right? These are just kids that are, they're born poor. Like that's the only crime they ever committed. It's just where they're born. So I would think we just got to focus on the response, because the magnanimity of this crisis, and I'm telling you, all your listeners are going to forget that this flooding's occurred, because it's not in the evening news. Like like, do you see any of our mainstream media covering this every day? No, not anymore. But the floods haven't gone away. Like, it's such a significant problem. So yes, definitely they need more infrastructure, but right now, man, they need response. Think of this as like 911. Right?
Yeah.
When you've got chest pain, you're calling 911 to stop that heart attack, treat it, get you to the hospital, to prevent the secondary catastrophe of that blockage taking you out, right? And then it leads to your recovery. So I'm all about the recovery and the hospital and everything that you work, but as that paramedic, I got to have the right equipment. I got to get to you quickly. That means my lights are on, my sirens are on. I'm hoping that traffic is getting out of my way, and I'm coming to you with the best equipment to stop your emergency and then move you to recovery. We got to keep working in this emergency right now, and we are losing that race against the clock. So many more of those kids are going to be in trouble because of no access to clean water, right? No access to shelter, no access to primary health care. Did I mention they had any food? Of course they don't. Like, this is tough.
Yeah. Rahul, thank you for bringing us back to that. I mean, I think people will be interested in thinking about both the short term and the long term. So, we've talked a bit about the long term resilience issue and how do we prevent these kinds of things. But fair enough that what you're saying is there's a 911 here that we have to respond to urgently. So, what do you think of the global response, the Canadian response? How are we doing at answering that 911 call? Is it a matter of money? Is it getting the right stuff in the right places? What's needed to save the lives of the kids you're talking about? Maybe we'll start with you, Rahul, and then we'll go to Aslam on that point.
Yeah, I think globally the different actors of the world are stepping up and offering their support. I think it's not a high level of support, and because Pakistan's so geopolitically sensitive and in a difficult area of the world, different elements of our world are responding in. I really want to focus on the job we're doing as our nation, and I know you're an elected member of government, Garnet, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful here, but our government has failed the people of Pakistan.
Hey, I'm the opposition, so
Oh, I get it, but like, we have to understand and we have to acknowledge that our government has miserably failed the people of Pakistan, and I'm not saying that lightly. Like, let's just put something into perspective here. We were late, slow to respond, slow to offer money. That means those kids are dying. Like, let's make no mistake about that, right? The longer we wait, the longer you wait for your ambulance, the increased likelihood you have of dying. Quite simple. So the bureaucracy and the powers that be that were slow, slow and bureaucracy, these are common words that many people will hear. It has a negative impact and hurts folks. The amount of money that was programmed is small, right? There's 33 million people affected. We're not even over $25 million programmed. Then this matching program is disrespectful to the agencies here. So it's a $3 million match. It's only going to one group that, that's not common sense here. We don't work in a playing field of humanitarian actors. We all try to work together and help folks. So when a government says we'll only match certain groups, but not others, it actually unevens the playing field, and it's not helpful, to agencies that are not receiving the match, right? A decade ago, it used to be, hey, if you're working there, tell us how much you raised. We'll create a matching pool and the government will program that to whoever. So people were encouraged to give. The reason you create a match fund, Garnet, is you want to encourage Canadians to give. But when you create a match fund and say, but you can only give to here, you're telling people who they can give to. That's not encouraging them. It's not creating an entry, it's creating a barrier, and then it's actually hurting the industry. So our actions, like, it's bad enough when the government is slow to respond. It's bad enough when the government is woeful and under-responsive in its approach. But wow, is it really bad when its actions actually do harm and dissuade Canadians to give and divide a humanitarian sector? Like, you have got to have failed miserably to do that, and so, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but wow, we have really done poorly on this one.
Yeah, thanks for your candid assessment. Aslam,
I will add a couple of things here. I think I totally agree with what Rahul is saying, and we have been slow. The international community has been slow and we have not done enough also. And what really bothers me, like Rahul has said, that we should look at who actually is on the ground. Humanity First is on the ground, GlobalMedic is on the ground, and there are other organizations also on the ground. And when we don't get matching fund, that really hurts from our donors. Question us why it's giving to organizations that are not even on the ground there, and why you are not getting it. You claim that you are actually helping. We are reporting that we have already helped 20,000 people. We have provided, in right after the flood, the first week of flood, we helped 20,000 families to get 6 weeks of food packages, water purification, and all those things within the first week. And then that help has continued non-stop there. But that is not recognized. That's not recognized by anyone. And people are asking that, will the government match that fund? I said, unfortunately not. I mean, whatever you are giving, I can assure you that 100% of that is going to Pakistan. We are actually ourselves doing this relief work. There is no middleman. And the proof is there that the help is reaching. We have videos and photos that we show that our team is working there. How many other organizations can do that? So there needs to be some way where not only enough or sizable support is provided, but those organizations that actually are on the ground, they need to be empowered. They need to be helped to do their job. Who else can do that? We are nifty organization. We are agile. We just go quickly. I mean, Rahul can tell you that we just get on the plane within 48 hours or 72 hours of the incident, that people reach there and start helping. That needs to be acknowledged by donors as well as governments as well.
Yeah, so let's dive into this matching fund issue. And so those who are listening know this is an issue that with the advice and encouragement of many different stakeholders, I have raised on previous instances, that when there's a humanitarian disaster and the government says we're going to match funds to one organization or to a small group of organizations, that has the effect of directing donations to those organizations over others. And in the context of Ukraine, I had raised this, that the government brought in a matching program for the Red Cross. And oftentimes, ironically, what are left out are these strong kind of diaspora-led organizations in Canada that have big connections on the ground. So I said at the time, how about at least matching funds as well to some of the Ukrainian-led organizations that are operating in Ukraine, instead of just to the Red Cross. Sometimes I think there's a disconnect in our foreign policy establishment in terms of actually understanding the huge impact that maybe smaller, maybe diaspora-led and/or very innovative organizations are having on the ground. Now, both GlobalMedic and Humanity First, I think it's fair to say, are smaller organizations, right? So is this common that you find that the government is maybe overlooking or not recognizing and matching or other programs that they kind of instinctively like to deal with much larger players, and larger players who do good work as well, but may not always have the same footprint or connections in a particular country?
So yes, the government has, the bureaucrats, I would say, that have a system, initially had a system some years back where they created designated partner organizations. And Humanity First, I'll speak for Humanity First, that it was designated as a partner organization. But then whenever there was a disaster, an emergency fund was required, we would submit an application, we would not get it because the government decides that it's going to give, I will not name any organization, but 2 or 3 organizations that they would decide, and they will give it to them. While we will be actually on the ground, we will be actually doing the work, but that is not considered, and they decide on giving only to selected organizations. They have probably some criteria or whatever that criteria is, but it is not fair. Because we talked about Ukraine. Humanity First was at Ukraine-Polish border, set at providing medical help, food, and other help to the refugees who were crossing the border for 6 months, all from our own resources, all from donations from the ordinary donors. There was no government funding available for that. Same is true with every disaster. Same situation with Pakistan. And I can also tell you that even though we have a proven track record, we received funding from the government at the 2014 Typhoon Haiyan, when we actually were there and we built 400 homes from the funding that we got from CEDA at that time, the then CEDA. So it's not that we don't have a proven track record, but unfortunately, we don't get any more funding from there. So that needs to be revisited of how active players can be encouraged and supported to do their work that they do best in whatever geographical area they're doing.
Yeah, let's unpack this a bit, right? One of the government's mandates that it claimed in 2015 when it came in, it wanted its Global Affairs Canada to actually engage more Canadians, to be aware of and engaged with, international problems, right? It absolutely makes sense. But if its policy is to just give to big agencies and not Canadian agencies, then do you see how that just it isn't aligned, right? You can't encourage more Canadians to be aware of the world and be better global citizens if you are dividing and conquering a sector and excluding smaller players, right? Value for money is probably something the government does not understand. Like, there's no single KPI on the cost of a meal pack or a deliverable or a price per kilocalorie in the belly of that child or a price per liter of clean drinking water. And there should be, because smaller agencies can be far more effective than bigger agencies. If you're a big agency and you have a Canadian office and you have all these overheads and you have to receive the money, pay your Canadian office, then send it to your global headquarters, and then send the money to your local office, who then works with another partner, let's be honest with each other. How much money actually got to the 4-year-old child to get them clean water? A lot less than a smaller agency that's just based in Canada that takes the money and goes and directly implements with the partner. See, you miss 2-3 layers of middlemen. Now, the other issue of going to the big agencies only with this match is they're very big. They have lobbyists. Now, I personally have an issue with when lobbyists now arrange for hundreds of millions of dollars to go in a certain direction, but not others. Like, there's lobbying going on, and it has an impact on the way our tax dollars are funded. And if the tax dollars are being spent in a better way, prove it and show it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's very good. And the other thing is, the current agency that's getting the match, you have to pay to join. So now we're in this position where I have to pay to join an agency to get access to government funding. That's not ethical. That's not what our government is about. Our government is supposed to have an even playing field, not create monopolies, right? And in this case, with the way the policy is, by matching and selecting who the match goes to, I guarantee you, if I ask Aslam this, Aslam, if you had donors call you and ask you, are you getting a match? And then maybe they don't give you their donation, but they normally would because you're not getting the match. Has that happened to you?
A lot of time, many times it has.
So
we get a lot of calls whenever this is announced.
So it happens to us as well. So Garnet, you are aware we're just coming out of a pandemic and it's been tough on charities, right?
Yeah.
So here we have a government policy that actually makes it harder on smaller charities. Like, I hope you can go and talk to these bureaucrats, because their policy is so damaging. It really hurts the smaller agency. And I'll be honest with you, I could care less about your government money. I don't even want to bother asking for it anymore, because it's so inefficient, it's so slow, and it's not representative of Canada. Like, it is not who we are as people in the way that they are spending it. It's not innovative, it's not effective, it's not well spent. In fact, they could probably spend about half the money they do spend now if they spent it more effectively and achieve the same results. And I know that's a mean statement to make, but it's so true, right? So if the policy just went back to the old ways of, hey, GlobalMedic, you're responding, please tell us how much you raised, we'll match it and put it in a fund and you can apply to it. Humanity First, please do the same thing, right? No one's not going to donate to us then. You see, it's not going to hurt us. I know we're never going to get the secondary money, and they can give that to the big agencies that they want to, right? Like, it's less management for them to program larger grants to big agencies, right? Like, make no mistake about it. The other thing you have to understand, Garnet, our bureaucracy comes from those big agencies, right? Or they want to be part of those big agencies when they retire, right? So it's kind of like a world unto itself. And if you're a small agency who just cares about the people and want to do good, this policy hurts you and gets in the way. So immediately, we just got to get rid of this policy. Then we can focus on improving how they do things. But right now, this policy prevents people from giving, and it actually hurts that kid right now on the ground, right? Because he's not getting the aid.
So let's jump just briefly back from the kind of immediate emergency to the longer term policy questions in international development. What changes would you recommend that parliamentarians or governments pursue that would, I mean, obviously there's a specific change of reforming the matching program here that you've talked about, but what would you recommend in terms of how we can, dig in and shift some of these mentalities that you've talked about?
Can I throw a couple of suggestions at you?
Yeah, we'll start with you this time and then go to Aslam.
Yeah, listen, first of all, day one, stop this project. Like, stop this program. No more of this. You select who the match goes to as a government. That has to go. It should have gone a while ago. We've raised this to the highest levels of government, and crickets, man. Nobody wants to listen at all, right? And what's worse is the bureaucracy is aware, that this is a problem. And when they take no action and they know it's a problem, where's your ethics, right? So one, get rid of that. Two, what I'd love to see you do is create a competitive process, like it's a KPI. Here's your indicators, and show me how it's done. Or, like for people that are applying, or better yet, create two funds. So have the fund that the government actually administers, lower it, and then create another fund that's managed by a private entity or a consortium of agencies that are smaller, that could come out and say, this is how we would program this element or this aspect of the overall budget. And let's compare the two, right? Because the agencies that deliver more food, that get more clean drinking water for the same amount of money, that's the agencies we should be funding, Garnet, because they're helping more people. This foreign policy money that we give away, this international aid money, we treat it like foreign policy money instead of the humanitarian system it's meant to be. This government instrumentalizes, right? And lots of governments do. They instrumentalize humanitarian assistance, which is like a big no-no. It's one of the violations of humanitarian principles that we all say that we take part of. Even the government says it does. So I would try and create this competitiveness in order to improve the efficiency. And I'll tell you why. Garnet, we have 270 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. That's the forecast for this year. Let's go back to 2012. It was 70 million. So there's a 400% increase in the number of people in need. You're in government. Do you think we've increased our budgets 400% in the 12 years? In the 10 years since? Of course not. So we have an increased amount of need. We don't have that money going up. We've got a widening gap of money available to people that are in need. That's not just Canada, that's globally, right? Yeah. So we have to learn to do more with less, and we have to get more aid out there for less. And the only way to do that is increase competition to drive down price points and get more aid out, right? Competition is a good thing, especially in this sector. That kid really relies on it.
Yeah. So simply put, if we're going to feed more kids, then we need to have funders rigorously focused on who's feeding more kids with the same amount of money. Because if we can feed twice as many kids by putting the money in one bucket versus another, we better take very seriously not just the amount we're spending, but putting that in the right bucket.
I think the pandemic taught us that we needed multiple supply chains to come into our country. So how do we think that we don't need multiple supply chains to deliver aid? Garnet, I don't remember where you live. I remember it's just outside Edmonton. Do you want one ambulance in that city, or do you want 5 that are available to respond? It's just a simple thing, right?
Yeah. Aslam, what's your take on this conversation?
I think the best way that the governments and international organizations can respond is that if they have more availability, do you want to really give the one organization all the power and authority to do the work, or you will just want to have multiple organizations providing the same services? I mean, the government has shown that Bell and Rogers are not enough, but the big 2 or 3 big banks are not enough. You have to provide that opportunity to a smaller organization. Your reach increases, the quality of service increases, competition increases, and one organization will have a focus on one specific area, one region or something, but having multiple organizations means your aid is reaching multiple in different variety, in a wider population, wider area. That's very important. And then in terms of who the government should be funding or the funds should be available, look at the donors. The Canadian citizens are donating to charities. And if they have trust, they have confidence in one of the charity and they're giving donation to them, the government should step up and say, yeah, people have confidence in this organization. Let's support them further. Let them do their job in a better way. So that's the kind of attitude that we should be looking at. And I totally agree that you cannot give monopoly to a few organizations. It's always in the best interest of the consumers or the beneficiaries or people who are at the receiving end that they have multiple organizations, multiple groups reaching out to them. The coordination can be done, and that's where UN comes in. OCHA and other bodies are there to do the coordination, and they can work with the governments. I mean, that happens. I mean, we are part of PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, and whenever we respond to the hurricanes in South America and Caribbean area, there is one central coordination body, but different organizations are given different regions to go and work, and they're assigned different areas. That happened in even Bangladesh, where we were assigned a complete district that you go and work there, and that was our playing field. That's how the aid should be going. That's how we can be more confident to help maximum number of people in the shortest possible time.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to just add one thing,
yeah,
if I could, Garnet. Like, the other thing that we need is we need a strong, significant supply chain. You look at the earthquake in Haiti, you look at the Pakistan floods, you look at the Pakistan floods now, you look at that war in Ukraine, everybody's scrambling for life-saving assistance, right? And as Canadians, you know, we're very innovative, we're very smart, we can manufacture, we can produce things. In fact, like our water units are made in Richmond Hill, just north of the city, right? Like think of that. Our field hospitals are made in Vancouver. You know, like, so if we had, and we've pitched this to government before, but again, it's probably too innovative and it provides value for money. We said, look, why don't you give us some funding? We will stockpile and have at the ready emergency response aid, humanitarian assistance, life-saving aid that you cannot buy on the streets of Islamabad, you know, after this flooding. You cannot buy on the streets of Port-au-Prince after an earthquake, right? Air Canada, WestJet, they can all fly this out, you know, use government funding to reallocate some of those aircraft out. Our military can move it. But if we had lots of stockpiles here that we made available, not to one agency, but to the host government, to multiple agencies that are responding, do you see on day one, we could be doing something more tangible and giving that kid a much better shot at living than this current debacle of a system that we do now. Oh, and by the way, those funds would be spent in our country. They would create jobs. We would create more innovation. And, you know, the best part is more other agencies in the world would probably see the quality of our equipment, buy more. We'd actually create an industry in Canada saving lives abroad. I mean, that would be something to be proud of, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So have the stockpile in advance, and yeah, I think this is a really good discussion, and yeah, there's so much to dig into on this. I did have one other question. I mean, I've got a few others. I did have one specific question I wanted to ask, maybe in a bit of a different direction. I do get calls from people, messages, and it's not a majority by any stretch, but there are people out there who say, well, this is all well and good, but we have problems in our own country. We have problems in Canada. You know, it's not our responsibility to be, at least at a public funding level, dealing with these things out of the country. Maybe those people aren't interacting with you, but I'm hearing some of them as an elected MP. And if some of those folks are listening, maybe we'll start with you, Aslam. How would you respond to those that say, well, we should solve all the problems in Canada first before we respond to some of these issues happening overseas?
Right. It's a very good question and a fair question. My response to those people, I mean, I get these type of questions also. And my response to them is that, how can you, we are called human beings, and human beings means we have to have humanity. When we see people suffering, we see people dying, children dying, how can we not respond? How can we not react? It's inhumane to sit quiet and let people die. We need to see what priorities are. Our response principles is that, number one, save lives, then provide clean drinking water, then provide food, then provide clothing, then provide shelter. So there are steps. Canada is a first world country. If we are doing it, we are helping people in Canada, and Canada has got a social system, infrastructure is there. Despite that, Humanity First has food bank. Humanity First is providing support to the newcomers. Humanity First feeds at least 3,000 people every month from our food bank just in GTA, and we do that in other cities also. So it's not that we are forgetting the needs of our own people. Charity begins at home. We are taking care of people in our country, but when we see that there is an urgent need, there is an immediate need, otherwise people are going to die, we cannot sit quiet. We cannot just be aloof from that fact.
Mm-hmm. But maybe related to that, I mean, I think there would be people that would say that's great that you're doing that, and as human beings, we do have that responsibility. But I mean, we've talked a bit about many of the inefficiencies and problems in government. How would you respond to that person who kind of follows up the question, says, "Yeah, that's great, but why should the Canadian government, why should taxpayers' dollars be involved?" How would you respond to that sort of a question?
The world has become a global village. We cannot isolate and live in a fool's paradise that we are not going to be affected by what is happening at us or in the world. Poverty breeds corruption, corruption breeds crime, and when there is inequality, injustice created in the world, when the African countries are not taking care of the poor countries, then there is a resentment that develops, that there is the rogue community grows up. People take advantage of that situation and exploit that situation. So we don't want to have that happen. We have a social and global responsibility to take care of those people who are in need. Can we be aloof when we are using sources in international market? We are exchanging oil, food, other minerals, and a lot of other things. It is a global market, so we cannot be isolated what the global village is. It would not be even appropriate to think we can just close shop, live ourselves on our own terms. I recently heard China saying that if they start building batteries, it's going to be a big impact internationally around the world. While America has every right to batteries, but China knows that it is a global village. If one country starts doing something, there would be impact globally for those things. That's considered in humanitarian aid also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Garnet, you got to talk to your folks and ask them why. Like, why are they asking these things? And I think there's going to be a common theme that comes up, and it's going to be that they're really skeptical of the value for money provided and the efficiency and the effectiveness of our government and the way it programs money. And you know what? I'm right there with them. Like, I can't. I am a firm believer that we could get more value for the money we spend if we did a better job programming it. Like, we just see too much waste, right? And you just see so many missed opportunities for improvement or lower costs and be more efficient and get more aid out there. And I think that if we had a really effective, efficient system, like a truly effective, efficient system, the doubters and the skeptics wouldn't give you the same argument and complaint, right? And then when you go back and you explain to them, hey, listen, we run a pretty big food program globally, and we actually use the lessons learned from that to launch it here just at the start of the pandemic, because guess what? In the last 2 years in our country, our food bank usage has doubled. So programs like ours, when we run them domestically, and you heard Aslam, they run food banks domestically, right? We run supply chains into food banks. Aslam's food banks get some of our food banks. We can produce it for 23 cents on the dollar compared to what they could buy it for, in the markets, right? So we actually developed that program while responding to and saving lives overseas. So there's a benefit to helping Canadians here from it. We're also working here. Many agencies work in both places. But I think if the skeptics understood that we were effectively spending money, and right now our government isn't, so you can't make that statement. But the bottom line is, yeah, we have to help people. I mean, like that 4-year-old kid in Pakistan that I keep referring to that doesn't have clean water, like, you don't think he deserves our help? Of course he does. He deserves everybody's help. He deserves the world's help right now, because he's affected by something he didn't create, right? And he needs our assistance in keeping him alive. So it's super important that we do that. But I do understand their point, because we have a lot of problems at home, but we cannot forget that we are part of part of one earth, right? Like, everybody in this planet are our brothers and sisters, and we want to treat everyone the way we want them to treat us. And you know what? There may come a day where we desperately need the rest of the world coming to us. And do we want them saying, oh, what do I care about Canada?
Yeah, I very much agree with both of you on the point of the importance of human solidarity. I also agree that sometimes that discourse around skepticism about aid in general is tied to people's perceptions of aid effectiveness. Usually, when I hear those issues raised, it's probably going to be around a project they've heard about where maybe there isn't a great development impact, or maybe there is, but the person doesn't really understand that there is. And so they look at something and they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why aren't we spending the money here? But that person is much less likely to say that if the story is of, an intervention that has a very obvious impact and one that's tangible for them to understand. Is there also, when you talk about sort of the enlightened self-interest side of this, is there also a strategic, sort of geostrategic dynamic? And you talked about how we shouldn't instrumentalize aid, we should be focusing on humanitarian outcomes. But on the other hand, we should maybe be aware that if we're not offering help, there's other actors with other interests that will be offering that help. And in the context of Pakistan, we can talk about, for instance, the significant efforts of the government of China to extend their influence in Pakistan and many other parts kind of across Asia through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative. Does this make you queasy to even talk about that, or is it legitimate to say part of why we need to be providing support is because if we're not present, somebody else is going to be present, and they might have other interests or other things they're asking for?
I would say that that is never a consideration. I think the aid has to reach people without any vested interest. We should, I mean, whoever is providing, we should appreciate it. There's no competition. There should not be any competition in there. And we should forget all animosities and enmities and just join hands in providing aid. There should not be any other consideration when providing aid.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say that, as an operating aid agency, all we care about is the beneficiary. We just want to get, that kid water, and we just want to keep people alive. And that's how we program the funds that we raise. But we are not naive. We understand that, if you go back to 2010 and you look at the earthquake in Haiti, and you compare the fact that it affected, let's say, 3 million people, and devastating, awful, and you look at the amount of money that the world promised it, right, versus the 20 million people that were affected 6-8 months later by flooding in Pakistan, and the amount of money that was offered there, it's, it isn't based on needs, right? Like the global response is often very politicized, and it's based on geopolitical interests. And what you're talking about with China is, the roadway initiatives and stuff. A lot of that more ends up in development money, which follows kind of these disasters. So you kind of see, more of our positioning as a nation there, right? As an agency, we would never get involved in that. But sometimes what really concerns me, Garnet, and it's the politicization of humanitarian aid in our country based on ridings that have significant diaspora populations, and they're swing ridings, right? And how they could draw more money in because a government that wants to stay in power wants to keep those seats, right? And go out and say things to that community because it just happens to be where they live. And that's really where, we get so frustrated with, right? Because governments can be instrumentalizing our humanitarian assistance dollar. And we need to be very careful of that because, again, it's about the beneficiary, not about a potential gain of a government seat here.
Yeah. So let me probe that one a little bit, because I mean, on the one hand, of course, I agree that we don't want governments deciding on aid allocation based on domestic politics. We want them deciding in terms of humanitarian impact. But I would also say that it's a positive thing if governments are engaging with and listening to diaspora communities who maybe some of those very people pushing the government to be more engaged with small organizations that are present on the ground.
Slippery slope, double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at it. So if you're a government and your base comes out of Quebec, and there's a lot of, let's say, Haitians in Quebec, and this earthquake occurs, so your reaction is to give more money, than, let's say, a diaspora group of, folks from, I'm going to say Turkey, I'm just going to make that up, who happens to live in an area of the country that doesn't necessarily vote for you. that kind of stuff can't happen, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff can't influence policy, right? And I'm afraid that sometimes it creeps into it, right? Because if you just look at hard numbers, like if you just take all the humanity out of it and just say, but there's 2 million people affected in this crisis and they drew $100 million response, and there's 2 million people affected in this crisis, but they only drew a $3 million response. Why? Like, can we dig into that? And it does happen. Like, no one's immune to this, right? Happens in every single country out there, especially a country like ours where we've got, diasporas. So it would make sense that, groups are calling you up or members of government up saying, please help my homeland, original homeland, right? It's important that people are there, and it's important for you to listen to their voices. But do you see, our policies shouldn't be like, we don't want to place a value on one people over another. And right now we do. Like, our policy is not well defined, right? Just look at how much we give and where we give, and this kind of, we promise the world policy, right? So I'm just saying there's some scariness there.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. At the same time, I know there's a very large Pakistani Canadian diaspora, many members of parliament of Pakistani origin, and we've discussed here how the government's response was late and inadequate. So that's I find that interesting. Aslam, I have a specific question that I wanted to ask you about the context in Pakistan. I've raised concerns about the parliament and other places about minority rights in Pakistan, Christians, Hindus, other minorities, and Muslim minorities such as Ahmadiyya Muslims. Could you speak a little bit to how our aid policy can ensure it's getting to those maybe more politically vulnerable minorities within a context where there's a natural disaster?
It's a good question in terms of with context of Pakistan. One of the basic humanitarian principle is that there cannot be any discrimination in who's the beneficiary would be. The aid should be provided without any distinction or discrimination between where it is going and who is getting it. And that is the principle that we follow, and almost every international NGO follows that principle, that when they go into the area, they provide the assistance to everyone who is in need without any discrimination there. There are definitely challenges in Pakistan because of different sects, different groups, some challenges of persecution of community, religious minorities. So those are challenges that you have to face. And for that, you need to have more security over there. Not only just the discrimination factor, but there are groups who are there to attack the aid provider or loot the aid convoys. And we need to be very careful of that. This is one of the reasons is that most international organizations prefer that they have local ground partners on the ground, or they're doing this work on their own, so that they can ensure that this principle is not violated, that aid is reaching to everyone. And that has been our objective also, that we are making sure that it is reaching out to all populations and no one is left behind there without particularly focusing on a particular community or majority or minority. We make sure that it reaches equally to everyone.
I'd say,
Rahul,
Garnet,
go ahead. Yeah,
I'd say, Garnet, listen, in our world, in the humanitarian principles, we have like mantras and mottos we live by. And one of them is, aid is to be delivered on the basis of need and need alone, right? No political interference, no other obstacles or impediments and interference. But I mean, let's be honest with each other in this podcast, right? It's a bit of a false prophecy when we pretend that our international humanitarian assistance protocols and guidelines are ensuring that aid is to be delivered on the basis of need and need alone, when you're deciding who's going to get extra money and you're directing matching funds, right? Like, if we had a policy where everyone that was working was eligible, then more people would be reached, and more of the groups would be reaching some of the minority groups, because they're very interested in those groups and they have access, right? See, there's always three things in this triangle of response, right? There's determining a need, there's ensuring there's funding or resources available to send, and there's ensuring you have access, whether that's getting into the country or getting into the neighborhood, right? But you can't be boots on the ground trying to reach the most vulnerable. And often, Garnet, in many places, the most vulnerable are a persecuted religious minority, right? Like that's just reality, right? But you can't have a big picture macro view of I'm only going to give this big group with its lobbyist the matching fund and disincentivize the smaller groups that are probably most likely reaching the persecuted minorities, right? So the next time your colleague stands in the House and professes the greatness of our policy, please call it out and say, but the implications of the boots on the ground actually make it harder to do what you pretend that our money is doing. And I think if more Canadians saw that, they'd be just outraged, about how bad some of these programs are and how badly they affect the sector.
Well, we've gone about an hour. Thank you both for your passionate comments. We've covered a pretty broad range of issues related to international development, and I hope people will consider what you said in terms of not only their participation in politics, but also their personal giving. That they'll look at Humanity First, they'll look at GlobalMedic, and they'll look at other organizations that are involved in responding to crises like this. I'll give you both kind of the last word. If there's anything you want to add about the situation in Pakistan, about international development, aid principles, things that maybe we've missed in this conversation. So maybe we'll go Rahul and then Aslam for closing comments and then wrap up.
Yeah, I'll start by urging all your listeners to contact everyone they can in government and tell them to stop this stupid policy because it's terrible and it has a negative impact. So please do that. Two, please consider a donation into GlobalMedic for our work, whether it's globally or Pakistan. In Pakistan, we're working with multiple partners. We're getting people access to clean drinking water with these family emergency kits. And that's a game changer. That's going to save lives, right? We add in some hygiene items, so soap to keep those kids healthy. We add in a solar light because we know that folks don't have any power. We're giving out food. If you're not going to give to GlobalMedic, give to another agency that's responding. Do your research, do your homework. Let's extend the olive branch and let's help out, a stranger in Pakistan because they really need our help right now. And, one day they could be helping us. And the last thing I'd say is, I just wish more people were involved about some of these humanitarian decisions and foreign policy decisions because they have a direct impact on people's lives. And we're not doing a very good job as a government or a nation right now with the efficacy of the delivery of our aid. And no one cares. And that's why no one changes it.
Thank you, Rahul. Aslam, final word to you.
Thank you, Garnet. So I would just say that, the need is tremendous. Need has not subsided as the need information in the media has subsided. And I would request donors and all the listeners that do your research, see which organization is on the ground, which organization is actually delivering the aid, and help them out. Both you can join us and volunteer. Humanity First is a very transparent organization, or you can give your donation and be confident that that money will reach to the people immediately who are in need. And we are doing this non-stop help to help the people in need urgently. We're going to go into midterm solution also, where we're going to help people rebuild their shelters by providing them construction material. We are planning to reclaim the farmlands by providing them agriculture supplies so that they can really go back to their livelihoods. So this is something that we're going to do in the midterm also. And for that, we need funds. We're going to continue to need funds for many months to come. So I strongly encourage listeners to please do your research and come forward to help out. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for your time today, but for more important, the incredible work that you're doing, helping the people of Pakistan and making a positive impact around the world. Thanks everybody for listening. We have Resuming Debate episodes coming out every 2 weeks this fall. If you like what you hear, please share this episode. Look back at older episodes. We've got a lot of great earlier episodes from the spring and last fall that are still very relevant, digging into issues like populism, like the war in Ukraine, domestic issues as well. So leave a review, 5 stars, 10 stars if they'll let you, and we'll see you again with another episode in 14 days.